Happy International Women's Day. I'm Rob Volpe, the empathy activist, and welcome to Reading Between the Lines. So this is a big episode. We've got 4 different things to cover today, and I want to get to all of them, so let's go. First, we're going to talk about the women that helped shape my career, and I also want to hear about yours. And then we're going to talk about the radical act of buying a hat, and what that means and what it says about who we are right now as a society. Then we're going to talk about why I have been glued to my phone and the TV every morning since the war in Iran began, and why that's not good for any of us. And we're going to answer a question that an audience member asked me 2 months ago that I've been thinking about ever since. Do micromanagers actually have empathy with the people that they manage? I know that's a lot, so let's go ahead and get started with today. The United Nations theme for International Women's Day is rights, justice, action for all women and girls. And I think that is exactly right. And there's a lot of work still to do on that front. But today, I want to start somewhere personal. As I look back early on in my career, I realized, and I made a list of different managers that I've had, and I divided them up by female and male. And I realized that there were 4 in particular early on: Nancy, Kathy, Noddy, and Candy. And they were my early managers at jobs I had in high school and in college, and they were actually office jobs. And each one of them taught me the same essential lesson in her own way. And that lesson was to take the work seriously, but don't take it all so seriously. And that may sound simple, but I've learned over time that it's not. That there's a balance between caring deeply about the work that you do, but not losing yourself in the process. And that's something I've tried to draw on my entire career. In fact, while I was having those experiences a year or 2 later, it showed up when I was interning at CNN's London bureau. A producer that I was working with there named Helen, she told a colleague who later relayed it back to me that I was really good to work with because and I'm quoting her, that I didn't get my knickers in a twist. And that's a British expression, and you can look it up, but it basically means that I take the work seriously, but I don't take it all so personally. I don't get all worked up. That coming from a seasoned news producer at CNN London, and I was 21 at the time, that just felt like the highest possible praise. And as I look back on it, all of these women were modeling empathy in action long before I ever had a name for it or understood the 5 steps or anything. But they were actually practicing that with me. They were taking the time to help me and teach me at a larger level, not just the practical tasks, but what to actually do and how to think about moving through the world. And so here's my question for you today. Who are the women that have shaped how you work, lead, or show up for other people? I would genuinely love to hear. Please leave a name in the comments or just shoot me a DM or hit a reply on the newsletter and tell me one thing that person gave you. And the women that are in your life, whether they're daughters, nieces, students, or young women, young professionals in the workplace, tell them about someone who's shaped you. Let's pass it forward. So happy International Women's Day, everybody. Okay. I want to show you something. Actually, no, I want to save that for the next segment, but I've been fighting a cold, and so I've got some tea with me. But first, I want to tell you about a hat. So a few weeks ago, my friend Minette Norman, who wrote the book, The Boldly Inclusive Leader, and also the Psychological Safety Playbook, and has a second edition of that, or second book, coming out as a follow-up to that. So check it out. I will put a link in the show notes here. But she posted about a hat that looked remarkably like this one that she had found. And I loved this. And I was really struck by it. I hope you can see it in its focus. But it says, Radicalized by Basic Human Decency. I mean, shouldn't we all be? Shouldn't that? It's not even really something that we should be radicalized by. But I absolutely love the hat. And my fellow empathy activist, Maria Ross, she and I both saw that at the same, within hours of each other on social media. and immediately messaged her, "Where did you get that hat?" And it turns out that it was produced by Sharon McMahon, author, and she's on Instagram. You can follow her. Sharon Says So. I'll put her tag in the chat as well. And Maria and I also ordered one and then put together a little photo collage. But as we were messaging back and forth about the hat, it got me thinking, and it got all of us thinking, like, when did treating people with basic human decency become a radical act? And so here's a small challenge I want to leave with you from the three of us. The next time you're out, and you might be out while you're watching this and listening to this, but the next time you're out, whether it's a coffee shop, a grocery store, anywhere where there's a service provider, just ask them how their day is going. What do they say? And ask a follow-up question. You can even try it with a colleague, maybe somebody that you don't know as well. Get curious about what you hear, ask the question, listen to the answer. That's it. That is the ask, because seeing and hearing the people in front of us, regardless of race, gender, political affiliation, class, age, or any of the other ways we get divided into us and them, that's not radical. That's just human. And that is actually where empathy starts. So Maria, Minette, and I agreed that if this makes us radicals, we are completely fine with that. So if you want interested in the hat or any of the other Radicalized by Human Decency products, check it out. The link is in the show notes below. Now, let me go back to this mug. You see this? This is my prized View mug. I watch The View almost every day. I don't usually watch it live because I'm in the middle of working on something, but I will catch up when I'm on a break and I can skip through and watch maybe the hot topics sections in particular, which I really love because that's when they're talking about current events. And they're covering the news, but they're also all sharing their positions. And one of the things The View has done really well, particularly in the last, 5 to 10 years, they've curated a panel where we've got a conservative, sometimes a Trump supporter, but not always, but somebody that's more conservative would call themselves a Republican, all the way through to more progressive, left-leaning individuals. And so you really get to hear all their different perspectives. And that, I find, helps me take everything in. But in addition to watching The View, I also read multiple news outlets. I've got subscriptions to 4 different newspapers. I get news notifications on I used to get news notifications on every device, letting me know when a big story breaks. And I've been known to have the TV on in the background while I'm also looking at the news on my phone or on Blue Sky to see how people are commenting and digesting the bits of the news. And so what I really have to say is, hi, my name's Rob, and I'm a news addict. Since I was a little kid, the morning newspaper was always present at the breakfast table, and it was fodder for breakfast conversation in our house. I decided I was inspired by Linda Ellerby. I wanted to be a journalist, and so I studied journalism at Syracuse's Newhouse School and reported for one of the student stations, including during the aftermath of the bombing of Pan Am 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. And so there I was, a journalism student reporting on a terror attack that involved my own university. And that was my first experience with what I now call news as trauma. And I actually wrote about this in the book. Tell me more about that if you want the full story. Link to the book is always in the show notes. And then I found, as I mentioned earlier, a year later, I was interning at CNN London. And so news has always been in my blood. Even though I didn't pursue a career in journalism, the work that I do in marketing research had been very much like journalism. I'm going out and finding out how people think, feel, believe, and reporting on that to my clients. But here's the thing. I've realized that even serious news addicts, we've got limits. I was living in New York City, many of you know, back on September 11th, 2001, and I ended up as an eyewitness to a lot more than I was comfortable with, and it can still bring me to tears talking about it. And in the weeks that followed that day, I was rewatching the events as we were searching for, like, who did this, why did they do this, and what are we going to do about it, and were there any survivors, hoping against hope. And it felt like every time I was looking at a news story and they'd show photos or show video, it was like living it all over again. And so here's what I've learned about why that happens. There's actually a cumulative effect of watching traumatic events in the media, and it can actually heighten the impact of a traumatic experience. And that's according to some landmark research by E. Allison Holman at UC Irvine, There is a link to that in the newsletter itself, which is linked in the show notes. Now, there's something that's recognized as secondary traumatic stress, and it actually appears in the DSM-5 as a contributor to PTSD. And what it means is you don't have to be at the event. Watching it and watching it repeatedly is enough to leave a mark. Woman did a test. Part of her research was looking at people that watched the Boston Marathon bombing that had happened years ago, and the feeling of traumatic disorder and stress that people had. And it was actually higher the people that watched it over and over again on the news than the people that were actually there live at the event. And that says something about the effect of all of this media and taking everything in. And for myself, I probably didn't start really feeling it consciously and having that sort of stress response, probably not until 2017. And, yes, that was during the first Trump administration. And yeah, that was really stressful. There was so much news that was going on that I had to actually turn off the news notifications on my devices. And then that wasn't even enough. And then we had to limit our TV news because we'd have CNN on all the time, or MSNBC as it was known at the time, now MS Now. We had to really shut it all down and contain it. And it had to do it again during the pandemic because there was so much that was going on, and you just get in there and try to watch and wait for information to come up. Any little bits of kernels of fact that you could hold on to make sense of the world and what was happening. And it was actually maddening in a way, and stressful and anxiety producing. And so I really started to adopt a mantra of staying informed without becoming overwhelmed and figuring out how to do that. And so I've been a fan of The View from the very beginning, but I have found that it is a way in maybe 30 minutes of watching, zipping through some commercials, skipping some of the segments, that I can keep up with what's happening there. I can also watch World News Tonight, and that is contained, and it's not all talking heads, and it's not all opinion. And then I skim headlines. Rather than reading in depth on every single article, I don't need to go into that spiral, looking and hunting for every single piece of news anymore. And then a week ago, the war in Iran began, and I found myself deep on my phone and my iPad and on watching the news, hunting for developments, but feeling the stress build with every kind of scroll, or as every segment rolled over to the next one, where there really wasn't anything new. After about 10 minutes, I'd realized that this was a futile effort, that it wasn't anything more, but all I was achieving was making myself anxious. And there's nothing I can do about that from this place in this moment. Recently, I talked about the highly sensitive person test. No matter where you scored on that test, repeated exposure to harrowing news builds up like a toxin in your nervous system. And so I've had to be going back to something that I wrote about a few weeks ago. Think Colander. Keep the things that you need, let the rest drain away. And I'm linking to that edition in the newsletter. It's in the show notes here as well, because if you missed it the first time, this week is as good a week as any to read it. I have found myself repeating it to myself almost every day. Just think Colander, let it go. Let that flow through. It might sound crazy, but what am I going to do with that? Keep the pieces of information that I need and let the rest of it drain away. So handy tips that are available that we have covered in this newsletter and past issues, all of those links are in the show notes. But do what you can to keep yourself in a healthy place and keep the anxiety down, and think Colander. Now, 2 months ago, I was speaking to the Alumni Learning Consortium about using empathy to build better workplace culture. And towards the end of that, and we were in the Q&A section, somebody typed a question into the chat, and we talked about it a little bit, but I was so intrigued by the question, and I was like, there might be some research out there. I want to go take a look before I give you the definitive, and I promised that I would do it as part of this newsletter. And then that was in early January, and then everything, I think that talk was the day that Renee Good was murdered, let's be honest. And then Alex Preddy was murdered. And so everything was blowing up, and I ended up doing a couple different topics in the newsletter. But now I am here. We are back. I have not forgotten about it. So let's talk about it. Do micromanagers actually have empathy with the people that they manage? And first, I will say I've been pretty fortunate in my career. I've been micromanaged a little bit here and there, but not often and not in a really intense, super stressful way. My first job in PR, my manager, Andrew, he'd hand back press release drafts and they were covered in red ink initially. And yeah, of course I bristled. Who wants to find out that you did something wrong? But it never really felt like micromanaging because I could feel the intent. I knew he was invested in me, not just in getting the one press release right, but that I was learning from him. And there's two lessons from Andrew, actually, and from that experience that I still use to this day. And the first one is to never use the word unique because nothing truly is. And then the second lesson, do not repeat the same word in adjacent paragraphs. And that's a lot harder, but I really value that because it does improve the writing and it forces you to use different words. And English is such a lovely language and there's so many words that are available. So I try to do that. And the difference there, I think it really was the intent. And I could feel that he was invested in my growth. And so the way that I viewed everything and the engagement and how I grew to the point when then I wasn't getting the same amount of markups back, that changes everything. Now, I know as we're talking about micromanaging, this might be striking a chord for a few people. Maybe you're being micromanaged and you're recognizing that, and those thoughts are coming up, but maybe you think that you are a micromanager. And if you're in that camp, stay tuned. I've got something for you at the end. So, okay, the research. And here's what I've discovered. No one has actually studied, best that I can find, the best that Claude could do, Google could not find anything that studied the specific question of whether micromanagers have empathy with their employees. Last year in 2025, there was a systematic review of 94 micromanagement papers, and that found that the field still lacks even a clear formal definition and a validated measurement scale, meaning we haven't fully aligned on what micromanagement is and how to evaluate it. And while researchers are still working to distinguish that, they're trying to tease it out from related behaviors or adjacent behaviors like an abusive or bullying supervisor, something that's really involving sustained hostile behavior. And those can certainly overlap. There are people that are micromanagers and they're doing it in a very abusive, bullying, hostile way. And then there are just people that are assholes. They're abusive and bullying. Those are not one and the same, nor are they mutually exclusive. And so that's where the researchers are trying to figure out how to clearly define it. But what the research does tell us, and there's some studies out of UC Riverside, Stanford, and George Washington University, they found that micromanagers are typically not people who feel powerful, which is kind of incongruous. You're like, well, wait a minute. These are people that are in a position of authority, but they feel powerless despite having power. And that's about their own anxiety and their grip on every small decision, holding on to that, needing to weigh in on something. That's about anxiety. They are consolidating control because letting go feels genuinely dangerous to them. And I can relate to this a bit. I probably was more of a micromanager in my past and in the early days of Ignite 360 when I was setting the company up and setting the stage. And I was really involved and clients wanted me directly involved. And so I probably was micromanaging, but over the years, I was learning to and kind of gladly letting go of things. And as teams developed and they became capable and learned the Ignite 360 way, they learned how to do things in the way that our clients were expecting from us, then it was great. Go forth. And there, I just saw an HBR article that I didn't link in this, but it's all kind of connected, that there is a leadership style where the leaders are actually in the work showing people how to do the things that that company is doing so that the culture is established and it endures. And this is the way that we do things and why we do them that way. I'd like to think that that was what I was doing, but I am sure there are some people out there that would say, oh no, Rob was looking over my shoulder with the biggest magnifying glass he could find. But here's where empathy comes into play. And here's my empathy read on this. I'm going to say that I don't think that micromanagers generally lack the capacity for empathy because they're human beings just like the rest of us. And that means that they are born with it. But in a stressed and insecure state where they're feeling anxious, those situations that are driving that micromanaging behavior, their empathy is getting misdirected and it's flowing inward toward, they're focused on their own fear of failure rather than outward toward the person that they're managing themselves. And the impact that they are having on the employee is not matching the manager's intent. And that gap is an empathy failure. And it hopefully is not cruelty, it's more blindness. There's a 2024 analysis that found, and again, all the links to this are in the newsletter, the online edition, which is linked in the show notes. So if you want to really look into all this, please feel free. But a 2024 analysis found that 91% of micromanagers, that's a lot, 9 out of 10, are unaware that employees actually resign because of them. And that's a lack of self-awareness, and that is a profound absence of perspective taking and imagining what might it be like to be them working for me. So here's the question. What can we do about it? If we're being micromanaged, what can you do? If you're on the receiving end of that, I've got 3 different things. First one is to actually try having empathy with the manager, kind of like as I was talking about with my experience with Andrew. What's the intent? What's behind this? And it's not about excusing behavior that might be hurting you. It's about understanding what's driving the manager's behavior. And that gives you options. And keep in mind that you're trying to have empathy with the manager, but you're actually doing this for yourself, because doing that is going to help you have more room to work. The next one is to ask the manager to see it from your perspective. And this can be a little uncomfortable, but try requesting a conversation framed around your shared goal of doing good work. Like, hey, I want to do my best work for you and the team. Can I share? Can we talk about how I work best and hear more about what you need from me? You're not saying that they're being a micromanager, but you are inviting them to use their own empathy because you're sharing where you're coming from and what your past history and experiences are. The third one is build your own psychological safety net. So document your work, keep records of decisions and outcomes, find allies that can see your contributions. And you know what? Give yourself permission to really assess whether this is a temporary pattern with the manager or a permanent one. Maybe they're under tremendous pressure for something, or they're put into a new role for the first time, and they're trying to find their way and they're feeling insecure about that. Or this might just be a history of behavior. What I do know is that being micromanaged in the long term will lead to burnout. And it's also going to reduce creativity of the employees, and it's definitely going to drive higher turnover. So understanding what's driving the behavior can be really helpful, but it doesn't make you immune to its effects. And so empathy is kind of the starting point to all of this. But to be totally honest, sometimes the most empathetic thing you can do for yourself is know when a situation has run its course. And then you have to decide what it is that you're going to do as a next step. So as I mentioned earlier, if any of this around micromanaging is landing a little close to home, or maybe you're feeling a little insecure, like, hey, maybe I am a micromanager myself. The good news is Psychology Today has a free self-assessment. I've taken it and I actually was like, yeah, these are micromanager tendencies. And I tried to be as honest as I could. I probably fudged a little here and there, but I ended up scoring a 24 out of 100, which apparently means I have little micromanaging tendency. And as I said earlier, I do suspect the people that worked with me over the years might have a few notes. And I'm open to hearing that. So reach out because it'd be fun to just reconnect. All right. That is the March 8th issue of Reading Between the Lines, International Women's Day, Basic Human Decency, News Addiction, and Micromanager Edition. It's a lot to carry this week, but I hope some of it's useful. And if this resonated with you, please share it with somebody who needs it today. Subscribe to the newsletter. Link is down below. Subscribe to this YouTube channel and find me on all the socials at Empathy Activist. Thanks so much for spending some time with me. I will see you next time. I'm Rob Volpe, and this is Reading Between the Lines. Take care.